Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bollywood Cinema Club, where we take a look at Indian cinema through the lens of, well, what we happen to be, Westerners. We like to give our love to Indian cinema because, hey, as Westerners, I think we don't know enough. And I know we don't know enough because it's woefully underrepresented in the dialogue. As at least film watchers in this country, we don't talk enough about Indian cinema, at least in my opinion. My opinion being the humble opinion of your host, Chris Stashu of the Culture Cast, where this show spun off from. On this episode, we're going to be talking about 1962's Saal, Baad, and I am joined by my good friend. He was on the first episode of this show. We're talking about Rogue, which feels like a lifetime ago at this point. Literally, but between the two of us, it's been almost 3 months since we recorded that episode, but it really feels way longer.
Oh my God. Yeah. I thought you were going to say 6 months.
That's in a lot of ways what it feels like. Your friend and mine, all the way from Pulp Dash Serenade. If you've been on the Culture Cast and you've listened to those Indian cinema films episodes, you've heard him on there before, Mr. Cullen Gallagher.
Thank you for having me back and for letting me suggest this movie.
Yeah, this came as a direct suggestion from you, and I'm not going to say no because I haven't seen enough to say no to, because I watched about as much Indian cinema. I've watched a little bit more than everybody else I've had on my show only because I've seen all those episodes that I've been on, and I watched a handful before that. It's not like I'm well learned in Indian cinema. It's more like this is a journey together. So I'm never going to say no to a suggestion, especially one that's based off of The Hounds of the Baskervilles. Hound of the Baskervilles.
Seems to be a lot of Conan Doyle in this.
Yeah.
And some third man.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about 1962's Saal, Baad. So the film is directed by Biren Nag. It stars Biswajit, Wahida Rahman, Madin Puri, and Asit Sen. And the film, as many Indian cinema films do, is a period piece it's a period piece thriller that involves time jumps, but it centers around the story of a village, Chandagat, the village of Chandagat, where a young girl is raped and murdered, or she's raped and then she kills herself. And the Thakur, or the kind of the lord of the area, he's the one who did it, and she kills herself. And then his punishment is metered out by the locals who kill him, and then his son is killed as well, and then his grandson comes back to the village to find that maybe, just maybe, there are still people dying out in the, I was going to say the moors, but I mean,
it's the swamp.
It's the swamp, but if it were Conan Doyle, it would be the moors. In Saal, Baad, it is definitely 100% the swamp. So, Cullen, I want you to tell me a little bit about what drew you initially to suggesting Saal, Baad, because this I think is now the oldest Indian cinema film that I have seen.
So I'm, still very new to Indian cinema, and I've loved everything I've seen, but I love horror movies, and I don't really hear people talk about Indian horror movies. So I just started Googling around, and this was one of the first that popped up. And, from what I gather, it's a very famous movie that was celebrated in its time. It's somewhat of a classic, especially the music. The Conan Doyle connection sounded really neat. I like this sort of, international fusion where you have, Indian, films working with this classic British mystery writer. As I was watching it, I kept thinking, oh my God, there's so many like American film noir influences. And that brings into, some German expressionism. It was really a transnational film. So it seemed really exciting.
So with all that out of the way, what did you think about the movie after you watched it?
Loved it. From the very beginning, I think I started, if I didn't text you, I started to and then deleted. The fog is just so thick. I kept thinking like, oh my God, this is like Edgar Ulmer, like Detour or something. Like you haven't seen this much fog since, a Poverty Row Hollywood film in the 40s where they had no money for a set, so they just had to put more fog up.
Right.
When he's, the main character, when he's trying to, catch, not a cab, but he's waiting for a carriage to take him to the family estate. There's so much fog, you can't even see anything. You just hear the voices and it's all disembodied. And that alone starts giving the film this sort of like spectral horror element. I thought it was, exciting. I love the sets. The songs were incredible. And I really liked how they sort of they sort of alternated between these really dark, moody, haunting songs, at night out in the swamp. And I think that's sort of the voice of, the moths, so to speak, calling him out, presumably to be murdered. And then, during the day, there are these love songs that are, quite funny. And, from the perspective of the love interest, she thinks that the Baskerville heir is kind of a dumbass. And I love that she's sort of toying with him. And anyway, I thought it was a really successful fusion of horror, noir, gothic mystery with music.
No, I agree. I will say, like I kind of mentioned at the top, this is the oldest Indian cinema film that I've seen now. And in a lot of ways, it's interesting to see the way that the medium was being used in 62 in India by Indian filmmakers, because we have our expectations of what we know they were doing in our country in 62 and the kinds of films that were being made here in the West. But the frame of reference that I had for something like this is effectively zero.
It felt a lot of my references went back to like 40s, early 50s. And especially, I kept thinking of like the Abbott and Costello horror movies, because there is a real sense of humor to this film.
Yeah, this movie it's a horror movie, but it's like calling Hitchcock a horror movie. Like it's a psychological thriller, but it has horror elements.
I rewatched The Hammer, Hound of the Baskervilles after watching this, and a lot of the story elements are very similar to what Conan Doyle was working with. So I think it kind of gets the supernatural gothic mystery overtone very well. But one of the things I liked is that the character that would have been Dr. Watson, he's just like, from Abbott and Costello. He's bumbling around. He's goofy. He's not very good at his job. You can almost imagine, some Scooby-Doo sound effects as, when he's like running away. And I thought that was a nice bit of levity to add to this story.
Well, and that's the thing about the story. I mean, obviously, kind of like I mentioned in the synopsis for the film, it's not exactly handling easy to talk about subject material theoretically. But I think because the movie essentially just sets it up and says, this is what happened, and we're going from there. And it never returns to that kind of dark point that obviously the beginning of the movie is, I think, not upsetting, but obviously the subject material of someone being raped and then killing themselves is not, it's just serious stuff, obviously. But like you said, that they immediately just start breaking that up with some like interesting scenes of comedy. I mean, pretty quickly into the movie, you have Biswajit interacting with Wahida Rahman, and she's like, "Are you blind? Are you deaf?" And it's like you said, she's just toying with him, but it's like it's helping to break up a movie that starts at a really low place. But I think because it starts there, it does kind of inform you as the audience, like this movie is going to have some darker elements to it.
So I kind of want to, if we can pause for a second, about their meeting. And I'm going to just call them by their character names. That's a little bit easier for me to pronounce. Biswajit plays Kumar, and Wahida Rahman plays Radha. And I thought this was actually one way that the film distinguishes itself from the Conan Doyle, and that in the Conan Doyle, the main characters, of course, are Holmes and Watson.
Right.
In this film, it's the Baskerville stand-in, the Kumar, who becomes the lead.
Right.
And he's kind of playing the detective, but he's not even really a detective stand-in. He's trying to figure it out, but he's caught up. He sees
part
this
of it.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really different sort of take. And at least in the Hammer, Hound of the Baskervilles, which would have been 3 years earlier in '59, Christopher Lee plays the character. He's not charming. He's stuck up. He's pompous. He's cold. He's much more like the landlord type. And they keep referring to, Kumar and his father and grandfather. Oh, the landlords. Kumar is a lot more charming. Except when he meets Radha, he's so struck by her beauty that he doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
He had been hunting, and apparently he was such a bad hunter that he couldn't even hit birds. And she comes over with a rock and is like, "You scared my goats with your gun. Maybe I should, and you can't even hit the birds. Maybe I should, try and kill something." And she's like, "Oh, I'll throw the knot at you." And I just love the way she's mocking him. She's emasculating him.
She's toying with him, but like in a fun, in a playful way.
And there's a little bit of antagonism in it.
Oh yeah.
Which I enjoyed. Like, it's not like she doesn't say right off the bat, "Oh, I really like you." Like, just from that opening scene, you would think, does she actually hate him, or does she hate him so much because she has this like innate attraction to him? And I think that's what it is. And I like that it doesn't enunciate her attraction. She doesn't go home to her dad or her uncle and swoon, "Oh, I met this cute boy." Like, she complains that he like got, scared her goats.
Right.
And so I thought their relationship is really interesting because it's not until the end where she finally says, "Yes, I love you." And when she does, that's a big moment. Before she does that, though, there's one of the songs begins with her with a gun, sort of miming the way that he would hunt. And again, she's emasculating him. She's taking the phallic symbol, the symbol of the gun. And yeah, I thought she was a really lovely character, very different than anything in the Conan Doyle.
Well, and I think, like you mentioned, the idea that they've taken this story that really does, and I guess would center around, Dr. Pandy and the detective, I guess, would be like close stand-ins.
So the detective is Watson, and I still haven't read the Conan Doyle original, but from what I gather, Sherlock Holmes appears like midway through where he's already there and Watson had thought he was dead.
Right, because this was after the Reichenbach Falls thing with Moriarty.
And in this movie, when the Watson type character thinks he brings the killer to the police station, the killer takes off a mustache and he's actually an inspector. And so I think that's supposed to be the Holmes stand-in. So it is different. They're not working together, but you can clearly see the writer of this film taking elements direct from Conan Doyle. Some of it's just verbatim, and some of it's they're reworking to make their own story.
Well, and the other thing about this story that the Conan Doyle story has that this one doesn't, there at the end of this there is no supernatural element.
No.
In the Conan Doyle story, there is. There's still, at least the Hound still exists. The Hound of the Baskervilles is an actual thing. In this, there is no monster, which I like that change. I guess I don't think it matters either way. I think it's a different story that they're telling, so that part of it gets inherently less focused than it does in the Conan Doyle story.
I mean, that's almost, I kept thinking of in like Abbott and Costello. Though in some cases the Abbott and Costellos do have, real monsters. But, at the end, sometimes it's like, oh, it was a human being all along. It's like a Scooby-Doo ending.
Yeah, it's very Scooby-Doo adjacent. Because it's literally like they pull the mask off and it's, well, spoilers. I mean, again, this movie's from 1962, but you should watch this movie, obviously. But the spoilers, it's Radha's uncle, who turns out to be
his daughter was the one who was raped in the opening scene.
Right. He's Radha's uncle, but he's also, his daughter was the one who the Thakor essentially caused to kill herself. So, and I'm obviously, I mean, I think the twist works. I think I'm not going to say it's like obvious, but it had to be one of the characters that we had met in the movie. But I think it's interesting that there is no supernatural element here, actually. Like, it's an interesting choice because the movie leads you on to think that so hard throughout, and it leans on those conventions and subverts it. Really, I think it's a really interesting subversion of the expectations.
Oh, it's really, I agree. And I can't remember the line verbatim, but, they sort of talk about, how this one act so many years ago has just determined all of their lives. And it's, this, sort of this violence begetting violence. And that's something that the Radha keeps saying, like, oh, my love can break the curse. Yeah, I thought it was I liked the plotting, the screenwriting. I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, turning the character that would be, I guess, kind of a secondary character in the original source material, turning them into the lead, I think like you mentioned, it's an interesting choice because, again, it allows you to kind of go in a different direction with the story and change the way that character is written.
Because Kumar's not all that clever.
No.
Because the Holmes and Watson, they're using deduction and so forth to figure out what's going on. I mean, in this, basically, Watson taught the Watson stand-in, Detective Gopi Chand. He basically, is talking to people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I saw someone hiding over, hiding over there." Though that was actually a bit of a red herring because that was a clue given to him by her uncle.
Yeah,
but none of these characters are all that bright. And I think
Kumar's strategy essentially boils down to, I'm going to go into the swamp. That his strategy is, if it's here for me, I will place myself in the center of it and see if it comes and gets me. And I hope that somebody is essentially there to stop it, or I can stop it.
And I like that I think it makes him a more relatable character. And I think what's also toward the end, what becomes a motivating factor for him is that people say like, oh, the curse is still real because you've killed Radha. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, she's on hunger strike because her uncle forbids her from marrying you. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. You think she's alive? And that's kind of dark.
Yeah.
There's this guilt that he's dealing with, like, oh shit, like I'm bringing death to more people. Like I thought I was just going to come here and claim my land, and like, this stuff, like, because somebody gets killed because they're seen wearing his coat.
Right.
He has all this on his shoulders, and that's motivating him to, solve the mystery.
And I really like this convention in some of these like Indian thrillers of utilizing like a time jump and showing like the kind of like the sins of the father being revisited on the children, because that is what this is ultimately. I mean, it's a story of how, like, the title of the film alone, 20 years later. I mean, it's about what happened 20 years after an event that essentially destroyed this town internally. And what are the ramifications of that if you happen to be related to the person who caused all of it? I think it's interesting because it's asking a different question than the Conan Doyle story is. It's a more humanistic approach to telling the story, at least about the characters that are the more interesting ones from that story that aren't, inserting themselves into the story. They're the ones that are already dealing with it at the start of the story.
I mean, the Conan Doyle, you're right. I mean, the Conan Doyle does still have the Baskervilles, generations ago still, raped and, murdered a woman. And then, it's sort of that sort of set off this, series of violence, and, presumably for generations, people are paying for this, horrendous crime. But as we said earlier, it's the main character is not the person solving the mystery from the outside. It's somebody who this is directly affecting.
They don't have as much skin in the game if it's not your family was the one who did it. It's just the stakes are a little different. If your ass is the one that's going to be killed, which is essentially what this movie keeps saying. It's like, Kumar, there is something in the swamps that's trying to lure you out there to kill you, specifically you, essentially no one else. And if they think it's you, they'll kill them by accident. Like, I like that. I like that idea because, like you said, it gives the character built-in stakes immediately.
And I like the concept of, I'm going to adapt Sherlock Holmes, but I'm going to make the Sherlock Holmes character the smallest possible character, and sort of remove any sort of intelligence from him. It's like that cartoon Garfield without Garfield or something.
It's a subversion of the expectations completely, but like we've said, it leans on the more interesting aspect of that story, which is the internal conflict of these characters. Because essentially, like you just mentioned, the internal conflict is not really different. It is the same. Like, you are having to deal with things that are happening to you because of decisions that were made by someone else. And that is like, that's here and that's there. except in this one you understand and you're getting to see that character deal with it. The other, in the other thing, it's like you're watching them deal with it. Now it's like they're the centerpiece. And I think it speaks to Indian cinema as a whole, that the focus of, like you mentioned, a Conan Doyle story are the humans at the center of it, not the humans investigating the humans at the center of it.
And to go back to something we touched on earlier, something that I find really interesting watching this movie being an American is just how much American and Hollywood and British cinema influence there is on the style of this movie, which makes me, first say like, cool, I need to like be more familiar with British cinema, Indian cinema before this, because I don't know how much is coming from, Indian cinema. I don't know what traditions this film is building on. I don't know what sort of position that Conan Doyle would have had in India at this point. But clearly this director loves Hollywood and British cinema, and the biggest clue for me is something they add is this basement, these like catacombs, and he films them just like The Third Man. And the climactic chase involves Kumar and the police all chasing, the uncle into the catacombs, and they have their flashlights and they're shooting. That's straight up Third Man chasing Harry Lime. I think that was a really unexpected influence. I was expecting, oh, cool, it's going to be gothic. Okay, we're going to have some homes, going to be some mystery. And then I'm like, where the hell did you pull this Third Man out of? Like, that's a really neat, fusion.
Well, and like you said, it's interesting to see those influences in a way that like I'm not expecting or you're not expecting.
It clearly I know the director was an art director before he made this, and then he made only one other movie. Clearly has an understanding of, atmosphere, of sets, of props, of lighting and composition.
And the usage of the black and white to make it feel... Again, this movie, similarly to another film we did, another more of a straight horror movie than this, Baad, it has like a dreamlike quality. Like, again, it's not, this is less of a fairy tale than Baad is, but it's like fairy tale adjacent in a way, like the feeling of it. It's more gothic fairy tale than folk fairy tale, but it still kind of feels in a way, you have the voice in the swamp calling you, and there's a monster maybe, but there's, it has that fairy tale quality to it, at least like you've mentioned, Western fairy tale quality tropes, maybe not Indian fairy tale quality or folk story, but definitely leans on Western fairy tale conventions.
And from what I gather, this was a hit when it came out over there. This was popular.
Yeah. Well, it was based on another movie from 1951 called Jinghasa, which is based off of The Hound of the Baskervilles. So this is an adaptation of an adaptation as well. So people already had seen and liked that movie and clearly wanted more. And yeah, like you mentioned, this was a massive hit when it came out. Also, the song from the film, Kahin Deep Yale, I don't know how many times you hear it in the movie, a lot. But that song is sung by Lata Mangeshkar, and she's one of the most influential playback singers in Indian history, passed away earlier this year. But again, like that's another drop in the bucket of this movie. Is it has not only some really good performances, it's based on a book and a movie that are already successful, but it also has really well done music. Like you said, like the music almost is so good that the parts that have the music feel like a different movie, but I'm glad they're in this movie because they break up the tone of the movie in an interesting way. Like you mentioned, they're a lot more lighthearted than anything else for the most part.
There are a few of the numbers at night that almost remind me of...
Siren calls?
That's the word I'm thinking of.
That's what I thought. It had a siren call quality to it.
And visually, I kept thinking of more now Sunrise, some of the creepy shots, because even that movie goes out, sort of into the, swamp-like territory. And you see the camera sort of moving through the, the reeds, so to speak. There's something really spectral, he's sort of, Kumar is walking, he's listening, the camera kind of goes off on its own. he sees other people that he doesn't know who they are, like talking, and he tries to find them and they run away. Like, it's quite interesting.
Well, and a lot of those first person shots in the swamps too. I mean, I was not expecting that, but you're getting essentially a fair amount of POV shots in the swamp, moving through the swamp. And then you get even POV shots from the uncle's point of view before he starts killing people, which I also really appreciate, because again, that's
seeing the hand come up in front.
Oh my God,
with the claws.
That's a horror movie convention that they're still using today. I mean, that's, that it's so successful. And the reason that it's successful is because in this movie, they're using it kind of to a little bit subversive effect, because you are thinking it's a monster and you think they're not showing you because it is a scary monster or it's going to be an interesting creature, and it's not. And they're subverting your expectations in this movie. And a lot of the other things where you're seeing it from that point of view, it's doing that because it's easier to do that than show the creature or create a full body creature that's as kind of believable and or as successful as that first person shot with like an arm or something just tends to be whenever they use it.
So something that I was thinking about as I was watching this, and I we can come back to the film itself proper, but this is not an obscure movie. No. It was popular. And, one of the things you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast is this is about introducing Indian cinema to Western audiences that will love it if they can find it. And this was a movie, I just said, like, Indian horror. I absolutely loved it. You don't need to have this grounding in, Indian culture and literature to enjoy this movie. If I had those things, I would get more out of this, but this is just a damn entertaining movie. And where I'm going with this is, why the hell is this movie so hard to see? It's not like I'm trying, I'm a scholar who knows these obscure films that, no one's heard of, and I'm trying to find them. This is a big movie, and the only copy we could find is on YouTube. And then we had to get the subtitles from an alternate website.
It's on Eros now, but it actually doesn't have the subtitles like they claim it does. It doesn't. It says that it has English subtitles, and it doesn't.
And so if anyone wants to watch this, go to YouTube. There are 3 copies of the movie on YouTube. 2 of them are stretched to widescreen and have like watermarks. Avoid those. There's a third one that's a little bit further down the search results, which is the proper, 1:3 aspect ratio. And then I think it was subscene.com. You search for the subtitles and it says in the comments, this fits YouTube. But it's such a shame, because I think this is the type of movie that a lot of audiences here in America would love. So many people that love classic Hollywood noir, horror, mystery,
gothic,
they would
horror,
be thrilled.
Hammer films.
They would love this movie because clearly the director loves those things too. And I think this could be a really good, point for people to jump into Indian cinema, because they're going to watch it. They're going to understand some of the references. It'll be a little familiar, but there'll be a lot that's new. And I think that's really important. And then there's just no way to see this. And I was happy with the crappy quality because at least I could watch it. But I just think how many audiences over here might be turned off because it's a little pixelated. It's 360p.
Well, I mean, it's one of the lower quality things that I've ever watched for an episode of anything I've worked on. But at the same time, we're still talking. Look, that you watched the same version that I watched because you gave me the version that I watched, because the version that I gave you didn't work because it didn't actually have the subtitles. So even through all of that, we're still talking so glowingly about the movie.
And I know. And we couldn't even how beautiful.
Yeah, we can't even see the visuals really. Like, we can see them, but there is no way that anyone listening to this can expect that if you go and watch this, you will not 100% understand what we're saying. And also 100% understand that when people were watching this movie in 1962, one of the things that was really being a huge success was the visual quality of the movie. That's the problem here. The visual quality of the movie is so good that it sucks that we can't see how good it is.
With these boutique companies, I won't say their names because there's so many, and I love what they're doing.
And we have commentaries on some of them.
I can't wait until they start digging into this Indian cinema treasure trove. I'm so happy that they're starting to do more Hong Kong cinema. I feel like there's now starting to be stuff that, wasn't even on DVD originally. So I am excited, but I see something like this and I'm like, if this and the director's follow-up movie, which is called, I have it right here, Cora from 1964. It's supposedly an adaptation of Rebecca, which had been made by Hitchcock, with some elements of Psycho added in. Like, you put both of these on like a Blu-ray box set.
Arrow, Kino Lorber, somebody would eat that up because it's highbrow. Because it's highbrow. That's the other thing about this movie. Like, say what you will about the quality of a movie and whether or not that denotes highbrow. Like, this is a highbrow movie because this is a movie that's influenced by very important movies and is in and of itself an interesting look at how Indian cinema synthesizes Western influences into something unique and interesting and uniquely Indian.
I mean, this just has like, what is it? Like transnationalism written all over this. Like, this is the type of movie that someone could do, PhD, sort of work on talking about, all of these influences coming together in a film like this.
Right. And again, it's a remake of another movie that's a Bengali movie. So it's a remake of a movie that's an adaptation of The Hounds of the Baskervilles, along with being an adaptation of a Hemendra Kumar Roy book.
I wish I was qualified in worldly enough to begin to understand like how deep this movie is and all of its references and how it interacts with culture and art. But I know enough to know that like I'm not smart enough and the movie still rules. And anyone listening that, take a look. I think, if you like horror, you'll really enjoy it. But especially if you understand these aspects of Indian cinema, write some articles about this movie and put them online because I think it's ripe for, research, and it needs people that are really qualified.
Well, like you said, it needs to be part of a discussion, maybe even the discussion of international adaptations of Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, which is, again, like you mentioned, an interesting entry point and avenue to what this movie is. Because, again, it is an adaptation, but to call it that is to miss the point almost entirely. It's an adaptation in that it takes the setup that and does something with it. But it's not The Hounds of the Baskervilles set in Mumbai. It's its own story completely. It's just like even like you said, even the parts of the original story that are so big and prevalent and kind of, again, like you mentioned, the main characters are sidelined here to talk about the human element of the story. The human element at the core of the story, as opposed to the mystery, the whodunit. I mean, we solved the whodunit, but in this movie, it's almost not secondary, but it's not the drive of the movie.
No, and I did not expect that going into it.
Right.
This movie has a lot of surprises. Yeah, it has a lot of new ideas. It's a really smart movie. And I mean, I feel like if you're going to do an adaptation, especially of something as canonical as Holmes. By this time, Sherlock Holmes was still, Holmes is the classic British mystery.
Right.
To take something like that and put a new spin on it, that's not easy. And this film does it very well.
Not only is it not easy, but it's one of those things where, I look at this story and I say, okay, so the entry point, like you've mentioned, is Conan Doyle. But then once you get into it, you find out there's, like you said, there's just so much more going on that it kind of asserts itself in a way that I wasn't expecting itself to as a movie. It's like, we're going to do something drastically different here with this story.
It's such a loving movie. I don't want to say a loving movie about movies, but clearly this guy loves cinema so much. Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard to have that element of humor of like sort of making fun of Watson and still have it be, it's really it's loving, it's warm, it's fond. He's not making fun of Holmes. He's not making fun of that tradition. And yet he still finds a way to inject humor without turning it into farce.
Which is the slippery slope with something like this is it becoming a farce of Sherlock Holmes, which I mean we've seen before plenty of times. I mean before Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly were doing it in the last couple of years. I mean parodies of Sherlock Holmes, satires of that kind of story have existed since that story existed.
Oh yeah, and I think one of the ways that they manage to pull this off is by like balancing. Okay, you're gonna have some levity, then we're gonna take you dark. Like that ending when they're chasing him through the catacombs. That's not funny at all. That's frightening. Like that's really tense.
Yeah, and it's really well shot in a way that it kind of it helps induce claustrophobia.
Because you keep waiting for that for that set to really come into play, because they introduce it early on, and I think Kumar discovers it because he reads an article. It's like, at the scene of the crime, they discovered there was something underground, which I still think is funny. He's at least he reads,
right?
Yeah, he doesn't ask the right question. He doesn't stumble upon it. It's just like, oh, he reads, and it's like, oh. Yeah, someone else discovered this. And there's like snakes down there and the detectives down there. And they even make a joke like, oh, it's the only place to be alone.
Well, what's interesting is to take the like the Holmes and Watson characters and really give them the bulk of everything to do, but not seeing them do it. It's such an interesting idea. Because like you said, Kumar does not solve this. It's incidental that this gets that the uncle gets found out.
And the only reason Gopi Chand is doing any detective work is he wants the money. He wants the reward.
Right.
He makes no bones about it. It's just pure greed.
And I think that I think the character of Ramlal, the uncle, I think is an interesting character. He's written a little, maybe there's a little bit of mustache twirling, a little bit. But it feels kind of, by the end of it, like I'm not saying he should feel like he should be able to do what he's doing, but I mean, you understand where he's coming from, at least.
I did not see him as being the villain.
Interesting.
Like I liked this sort of like third act twist where, he's like, oh, now you tell me you love this Kumar dude. Sorry, like that's breaking my heart. Like, no.
Right.
And, her familial devotion, she's really torn, and she's like, okay, like I guess I'd rather be the one who dies. I don't want you to die. You have a broken heart. I don't, and then he sort of turns around and it's just like, oh, okay, I see this is real love. It's okay. Like when he gives that, I fell for it. I thought it was sincere because I felt a bond between those two characters. And I'm like, you love your niece. You're not going to do something to hurt her. So yeah, that caught me by surprise when it turns out he was the big bad. As I'm saying all this, I'm realizing this was a red herring. This was a trap that I fell for. They wanted me. So despite having seen all the reference points that this movie is, working from, I fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker.
Well, and I mean, again, there is a little bit of mustache twirling, but it almost comes at the end when he's running around in the catacombs. I mean, it's like you said, it's not throughout the movie. His character is played in this kind of almost straight, essentially, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know how else to describe it. He's just played 100% straight. And once you find out why he's doing what he's doing, yeah, like you said, it was his daughter that died at the beginning of the movie. Again, I'm not sure hiding out in the swamp and trying to lure people out there is the most efficient way to do any of this, but it's definitely the most gothic.
Yeah,
it's the most vengeful spirity of it, that's for sure.
I'm not going to fuck with the spirits.
No. But there are no spirits, apparently. It's just him making noise out in the swamp.
I'm reminded of a movie I saw at Spectacle last weekend called Curse of the Dog God. It's a Japanese film from the 70s. And it begins with a bunch of jackass guys who work for like a uranium company or something, driving carelessly. They see a shrine, like a mini shrine at the side of the road. So, of course, they swerve and they hit it. And so they're cursed at this point. Then they see a dog in the middle of the road and they don't stop in time and they hit it. And then the little boy runs down the road like, oh, my dog. And he's, destroyed. And then these jackasses just drive off. And where I'm going with this is that these guys become, cursed by the dog god. and wild packs of dogs start chasing some of them and killing them in the street. So it kind of has a bit of a Baskervilles element to it. But what I really like is that as the movie goes on, you're like, okay, so the dog god is real. It's a curse. And then someone's like, wait, this might actually be like a human who's doing this and is using the curse. And then at a certain point, someone else is so angry that he tries to invoke the dog god himself, which backfires and a severed dog's head starts attacking him. But I really like this idea in that movie where there is the curse and it's real, but then there's also the humans pretending, they're doing what themselves, what everyone else is attributing to the curse. So you have this confluence where it's just like there is both the supernatural bad and the human bad. And as the movie goes on, there's so many more different types of badness and evilness and bitterness. The ultimate point of that movie is everyone is bad, everyone is cursed, the world sucks. Where's the dog god? Take us all. Anyway, very good movie, but I kept thinking about, this idea of curses versus, the human agency as I was watching this movie, because I'm sure that Japanese film was also inspired by, Baskervilles a little bit.
Well, and like you said, I do like that idea of people who know the curse playing with it and doing, invoking it or making it seem like it's real. Because again, like you said, the curse, somebody could be cursed, but whether or not you believe in the curse, if somebody else is trying to make you feel like you are cursed intentionally, that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's, vengeful spirits in the swamp luring you out. But no, it's not a vengeful spirit at all. It is someone full of vengeance, but not a spirit. But yeah, I don't think it needed to have the supernatural element in this. I think it works without it.
No, I would agree.
Yeah. This is a good movie. This is an interesting, also just like an interesting kind of movie, because again, we kind of mentioned this before. I never know what to expect because my frame of reference is Western cinema with a ever-growing pool of Indian cinema. And with this film, it, like you've mentioned, it's so informed by so many Western decisions, but they're so transformed that it's interesting to see those influences, but also to see how those influences are really changed in a transformative way into something uniquely Indian, even down to just, like we've mentioned, the music also being extremely popular from this movie.
I like how when you invite me on to talk about Indian films, I walk away with a list of like several more to see.
It seems to be always the way it is every time with everybody, because they're just all so good every time. It's I haven't seen one yet where I've been like, man, I would rather be watching something else. Like, no, I'm again, even the quality of the version that we watched of this movie aside, this is a worthwhile endeavor, especially one that's a little bit more work to track down. But I think if you track it down, you will be pleasantly surprised. And I mean, realistically, someone should reach out to Eros now and say, hey, fix the subtitle on your movie, because if that had worked, we wouldn't have had to worry about any of this.
I have a feeling it's a metadata mistake on their part, because on Amazon, like the Amazon Eros channel, it clearly says no subtitles.
Yeah, and the Eros Now thing on their app, it says if you pay the premium, you get access to the subtitles.
Which is not the case.
No, it claims that there are subtitles and there are not. So, yeah, no, you're right. Like I think the big bummer for me with this movie is just lack of ease to find it. And look, yeah, I get that we're in America and the lines of transmission of Indian cinema from 1962 was not great then, and it's only gotten better now, but they're not worrying about movies from 62, it would seem, which is unfortunate, obviously, because if this movie is as good as it is, we know there have to be movies that are as good, better, more interesting, as interesting.
Yeah, again, what I think about when I watch this is you throw this in any of the film classes I took in college and grad school. This would fit totally in. Like, there's no reason that a movie like this cannot be understood and appreciated by Western audiences. Like, I just feel robbed. Like, stuff like this should be more readily available.
Yeah, I know. I agree. And yeah, again, it is on Eros Now, but for us Westerners who want to be able to watch it and understand what's going on, there's not an option. There's not a good option. There are options, but they're not Amazon Prime Video, where, I mean, there are so many of the movies that we've talked about so far on this show have been just on Prime, either for free with Prime Video or able to rent for a nominal fee, which, I mean, again, I'm not complaining about having to rent it, but I wish that there was a better version of this that even you could just rent. So,
yeah.
So Cullen, final thoughts on Bees Saal Baad?
This exceeded my expectations. I had a feeling I would like it, and I walked away so full of ideas. You know, I've watched it twice. I'll be watching it a third time. I'm going to try buying a DVD on eBay to see if it looks any better. I don't know. I feel like I've talked so much over the past hour. I truly love this movie. It's superb. How about you, Chris?
No, I'm with you. I mean, again, I don't know really anymore when we talk about these movies. You know, the synopsis very rarely actually gives away more or less what happens in the movie. The synopsises for these movies are woefully shortly written intentionally, because I don't want the movie given away for me ahead of time. And this movie goes all kinds of interesting places that a synopsis would have given away. And I'm glad that they didn't. And I'm glad that, again, like these, whenever I watch these movies, I never know what to expect. By the end of them, I am always pleasantly surprised on the journey that I've gone on with the film, with the filmmakers, with the actors, with the songwriters, and everybody. Like you said, this is a movie that was a hit in '62. It's a adaptation of things that are still being talked about even today with Conan Doyle's stuff. And it mixes horror and thrillers and noir in a way that I was not expecting at all. In a way that is more deftly done than even the people who are being lauded as the ones making these movies. Yeah. What's that all about?
I'm so thrilled to check out the director's next movie. The sophistication in his style just blew me away. I think it's a shame he only directed 2 movies, because clearly, you know, a great command, you know, of technique, a deep understanding of cinema history. I feel like he should have been a bigger thing. Well,
I mean, unfortunately, I mean, he passed away right after the film that you're talking about, Korra, came out. He passed away at age 42. So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh
Biren Nog passed away in 64, the same year Korra came out. So, I mean, it's, you know, again, I haven't seen Korra, but would stand to reason, given how good this movie is, that movie is probably just as interesting, at least a movie or an adaptation of the book and the Hitchcock film. But yeah, I mean, cut down too short, clearly, at least for this. This movie is so good, I would agree, just based off this movie alone. So I think we found out the next thing we're talking about the next time we do one of these episodes.
I mean, if you're down for that one,
I like to do this show organically. If we find things that we want to talk about while we're talking about things, let's just do it. Isn't that what this is all about? I mean, that's the idea behind this show, in my mind, is we're motivating ourselves to watch more of these movies, the ones that we want to watch, because we've already found the ones that we like watching.
True.
You know, we did Rog. We didn't find anything from Rog until we found Bees Saal Baad, which was the other movie that you had talked about. No, I'm cool with doing Korra. That would be fun.
I found Godard, which is the Asphalt Jungle remake, and I bought it from somebody because it came with subtitles. However, when I started looking at the subtitles, I saw them referencing MP3s. I have a feeling that it's not a real subtitle track. Wow. I think they probably just used some sort of auto software.
Sure.
So it might not be watchable. So before I send it to you as a possibility, I'm going to watch it. But yeah, I'm always just shocked and kind of pissed off that when I watch these movies, they're not obscure, and yet they're
obscure here.
Yeah, and I'm just like, God damn it.
But again, Eros now has it. It's just where it's missing the one thing that we need to be able to watch it. Like, unless you understand Hindi, which I know some basic Hindi, but not enough to be able to follow along. And this is a movie, unlike some of the other Indian cinema that we've talked about, where you do need to have the dialogue of the characters. Some of these movies, the characters are so broadly painted, you don't need the dialogue. But in this movie, the dialogue is so well written.
Yeah.
It's a joy to be able to follow along. I mean, like something like Doom, which Richard Haddam and I talked about, like that's a big motorcycle racing movie where you don't really need the dialogue. I'm not saying don't watch it, but you don't need to focus on it as much as what it's trying to show you with practical effects. This movie, it's all about those character interactions and the dialogue and the way that it's written, and those interesting character interactions between Biswajit and Wahid Rahman. So, and we kind of didn't even mention it, but Kumar, as played by Biswajit, fantastic. First time I've ever seen him in anything.
Oh, yeah, we didn't talk about him.
No, he's great. He's fantastic. Like you said, he plays kind of the put upon, bumbling, but lovable idiot in a really endearing way. That also doesn't come off fakey, which is the big concern with that kind of role normally, is it feels a little... it feels like a put upon.
And if you look at those screenshots,
those are good screen grabs.
There is a good copy of this movie with English subtitles out there.
Why don't you just message this person?
Hey, that's a...
I don't know if they still have they still post stuff?
Let's check.
Nope, not since 2017.
5 years.
Yeah, good luck. I'll take a look around myself and see, because if you're seeing those images, then it exists. So
doesn't look like they're on Facebook anymore either. Yeah, their Facebook account is down.
Well, next time we do this, let's talk about Biren Nog's Korra, the Rebecca adaptation, because that will finally give me an opportunity to watch Rebecca, which I have never seen.
It's quite good. I'd like to read the book. And before I do that, let me see, 1964. There was a movie I sent you on Facebook, Mahakal.
Yeah, I remember that.
Mahakal from 1994. It's the Bollywood Nightmare on Elm Street.
You want to do that?
I mean, I'll see if I can find.
It's on. I think that one's on YouTube. Just gotta find the subtitle tracks.
Yeah, I'll take a look on some of my sites to see what I can find. Let me stop recording so we don't incriminate ourselves.
So, Cullen, when you're not here with me talking about Indian cinema, where can people find you?
I should be at pulp-serenade.com, and I hope to be there more frequently. Yeah, that's probably the best place to check. You can also just go to CullenGallagher.com, which has links to my various music projects on Bandcamp, and if I publish any essays, I post links there as well. I really need to get better at self-promoting when it comes to these outros. I'm always terrible.
Self-promotion's hard. Nobody ever said it was easy.
Where can people find you, Chris?
You can find me over weirdingwaymedia.com, which is where 19 plus shows can be found. All pop culture, weird, spooky, supernatural movies, TV, all kinds of things. You can find them all there. Just go to weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, BollywoodCinemaClub.com. Bollywood Cinema Club on all social media networks, but all you got to do is just listen. Like, rate, and review on iTunes. Share it. Share it. Why not? And you know what? Totally check these movies out. Don't just listen to the episodes. Watch the movies, too. Because these movies are awesome. And if you haven't realized that by how much we've been gushing over them, myself included, every episode that we've done, I'm telling you right now. So, Cullen, thank you so much, as always, for joining me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And for programming the movie as well. And we'll catch you on the next episode.